You've been walking blind in this world with propaganda coloring every aspect of your understanding of what is going on in America. The inevitable truth is it gets crazier before it gets simpler. It only takes one crack in that facade. It only takes one lie itching in your mind to realize, wait a minute, maybe these people aren't telling me the truth about other things too. The authority figures in our lives told us one lie. You have to ask the question, was any of the rest of it lies? Does anything I know about history actually add up? For most of us, what starts out as a weird moment watching the TV, a weird article that doesn't make sense, the whole world is subservient to some sort of hidden regime beyond the government organization. Imagine what they've done to shape our children's understanding of the last 5,000 years of history through the textbooks, through the accepted history. But now that everyone's realizing it, that's the opportunity to do something about it. A lie has to be repeated 1,000 times to be believed. The truth need be heard only once. Because you know truth when you see it, but lies do not hold up in the court of reality. It's the black pill and the clear pill at the same time. And it's just about how you choose to perceive it. You either look at it as the world is being revealed as deeply evil and nothing will ever change, or all lies will be exposed. The world has always been this way and finally the veil is going to be lifted. We can see the American dollar devaluing to nothing. Are people being addicted to drugs? Families are falling apart. Education is failing. Food is unaffordable. What happens to America if we don't change something? It's worse than what everyone sees, because I don't think anyone alive today realizes how fast an empire can fall when it's rotting in the core. We know that we're sending billions and billions of dollars of our tax money overseas that is turning into bombs that are bombing children in foreign countries every year. No one's receiving an education about the problems, and no one's calling anyone to account for it. Like, really, what the fuck is going on? And the only people being enriched by this system are the most wealthy, powerful, corrupt people on the planet. So my only question for you is, how the fuck did we get here? The press exists to defend regular people, regular freedoms, and to root out and expose corruption. But that is not the world we live in today. Fewer and fewer of them are journalists every year, and more of them are propaganda artists.
So it's the 1920s. Think The Great Gatsby meets Peaky Blinders. And the mob and the mafia have gotten pretty big and pretty rich off of selling liquor, the most popular drink in the country, on the black market. The CIA's very first official operation was to use their buddies in the mafia over in Italy. If you have a government of thousands and thousands of men doing things with a lot of power involved in their various jobs, some of those men are going to be bad dudes, inevitably want to abuse their power. No one is saying it's the whole government. It only takes a few bad apples in the bunch trying to abuse their power to start doing something really dark. The mob and the mafia learned how powerful sexual blackmail is, and they started to use it on all sorts of law enforcement officers, and they started to create a network of essentially spies that sought blackmail over law enforcement. That could be, first it's a bribe because this guy needs money. Then he takes the bribe and he does a favor for you. But then once he's done the favor, that's a second piece of blackmail. So the same technique can be used on a local law enforcement officer, a local sheriff, a deputy, all the way up the chain to the very director of the FBI. They started to hone that craft over the next 100 years until now we have exposed that Jeffrey Epstein was running a global pedophile trafficking ring that was being used to blackmail the most powerful people in the world. And the further they went in, the more impossible it would ever be to get out. What if I told you that Iran stole nuclear technology from the USA and has a secret nuclear weapons arsenal that they use to blackmail all the countries around the world into doing exactly what they want? And they have a global child trafficking ring that they use to blackmail the world's most powerful billionaires, politicians, and celebrities. And they have the entire US government on the payroll, bribed to do exactly what they want year after year. Psych! That's Israel, not Iran. And if it sounds crazy, it is. But how did we get here? The story starts thousands of years ago, but I think a good place for us to start is 1920. So, it's the 1920s. Think The Great Gatsby meets Peaky Blinders. Both of those are set in the 1920s. Organized crime grew up around the immigration culture of the early 1900s in the USA, and everyone was flooding in from Europe for a better life, arriving on the shores of America, famously overflowing the shores of Ellis Island, and packing into cities like New York City and Chicago. And they quickly realized that the America that they'd arrived in was not exactly the America that they'd been sold. Cities were overcrowded, jobs were scarce, money was scarcer, and pretty quickly, crime started to run rampant in these massive megacities of America. And so organized crime in the early 1900s was naturally racially segregated. And as it grew and grew and grew, and these gangs became bigger and bigger, naturally, they became more and more racially segregated. And it's not that weird to think that organized crime would segregate racially, because if you were going to commit a whole bunch of crimes, you'd probably not want to do it with a stranger. Because if your stranger friend got caught, how long do you think it would be before they ratted you out so that they could go free? The name of the game in organized crime is loyalty, and naturally, blood is the strongest loyalty you can find. And so as organized crime became a business, blood relationships, family relationships, racial relationships became the ties that bound organized crime together. And by the time the US government had the great idea to outlaw liquor, the most popular drink in the country, organized crime was already off to a great start. And this turned what were street gangs into an organized criminal cartel, the size and scope of which the world had never seen. Suddenly, small Italian gangs became the Italian mafia, the Cosa Nostra, and small Jewish street gangs became the Jewish mob. So it's the 1920s. Think The Great Gatsby meets Peaky Blinders. And the mob and the mafia have gotten pretty big and pretty rich off of selling liquor, the most popular drink in the country, on the black market, because someone had the great idea to outlaw it. And that was what allowed small criminal gangs filled with immigrants to become international crime syndicates that ran the entire country. Eventually, the mob and the mafia got so big that they realized they'd do a lot better if they just worked together. And famously, Meyer Lansky, along with some of his friends like Lucky Luciano, had a big meeting and formed what was called the National Crime Syndicate, or, I shit you not, Murder Inc. They called their mafia mob group Murder Inc. And what Murder Inc. was, is it was an alliance of all the biggest mafia families on the East Coast and all of the mob families. And by now they had started to spread all across the country, and all of this dirty liquor money started to fund things like Las Vegas, like a music industry to help them launder all of that money, like the movie industry to help them launder all of that money, like a bunch of political bribes and donations, and other side projects. One of the most important side projects that Murder Inc. took on was blackmailing the director of the FBI. You know, the FBI that should be in charge of putting Murder Inc. in jail. It was run by J. Edgar Hoover, one of the most famous pieces of shit in American history. And J. Edgar Hoover ran the FBI before they were even called the FBI. And in total, he was at the head of that ship for almost 50 years. And for the vast majority of that time, he was being blackmailed by the very people that he was supposed to be putting in jail. Somehow or other, the boss of Murder Inc. got photos of J. Edgar Hoover, shall we say, doing extracurricular activity with his male aide. This is back in a time when homosexuality was super frowned upon. And actually, our boy J. Edgar Hoover was a big part of promoting the fear of gay people in politics and in the agencies, because the communists would blackmail them. That fear, the Lavender Scare, ramped up significantly in the Cold War. It's not entirely clear how these mob bosses first got these compromising photos of the director of the FBI,
have questions. But once they had them, they proceeded to run rampant across the entire country. And once J. Edgar Hoover was blackmailed, he decided, let's have some fun, let's live a little. And so they started throwing these parties at this place called the Plaza Hotel, where they decked out this whole suite with cameras secretly. And then they would throw giant gay cross-dressing orgies with a bunch of the most famous politicians and celebrities and mobsters just mingling, having a great time. Think a rave, but it's 1920, and J. Edgar Hoover is filming you doing gay shit, or whatever other kind of stuff you're into. Who knows? This was the birth of modern video-based sexual blackmail, which we're gonna see again and again in this story. And it's worth pausing to think just how powerful this is, because we all know that men run the world. And we all know that men are great, but they like to stick their dicks in things without necessarily thinking about it. And if you think about it first and then you film it, sometimes you can catch them doing some dumb shit. And when you do, generally they would rather work with you than have the whole world know what they did last Saturday night. And they found out that this worked really well. It turns out that once you have blackmail on the boss of the FBI, you don't really have to worry about the FBI. I wonder who else you could get blackmail on. Politicians, regulators, the sky's the limit. And the mob and the mafia proceeded to get blackmail on everyone they could. But it wasn't just them. So J. Edgar Hoover also realized how powerful sexual blackmail was, and he proceeded to collect the world's most extensive library of sexual blackmail material ever formed. Until Epstein came on the scene, but we'll get there in a minute. So there's an important thing to talk about here during this Prohibition era, when organized crime is all over the place with no cop on the beat. They made a lot of money. Like, so much money, they did not know what to do with it. And so naturally, they founded Las Vegas, and they filled it with casinos. And in those casinos, they laundered their money for days. They sold drugs, they sold prostitutes, they took everyone else's money at the poker tables, and whole industries sprang up around this mob, mafia money that they were getting from illegal liquor sales during Prohibition. And once Prohibition ended, all of those networks of money laundering and trafficking and movement of illegal goods, they all needed something to do. And so they started doing what they had been doing with liquor, but with drugs and weapons and children. So eventually, the US government realized, that's a fucking horrible idea. Everyone is drinking anyways. Let's just stop giving organized crime all of the liquor money and go back to life the way it was. And unfortunately, there's no take-backsies. And so now we have this whole nation full of criminals running around rampant, and the cop on the beat is blackmailed. And now it's the mid-1930s, and there's this whole thing going on over in Europe that is looking pretty spicy. And by the time World War II breaks out, America's got all kinds of problems of its own, and they want nothing to do with that thing over there. That didn't turn out so hot for them. So by the time World War II breaks out, the mafia and the mob, this collective Murder Inc., are extremely powerful, and they've got their tentacles of influence all over America. And during World War II, the US government runs into a problem. They're trying to turn this gigantic boat, like think Titanic, but 2.0, bigger and better. They're trying to turn this giant boat into a troop transport in the harbor in New York City. And then suddenly it catches fire, capsizes, sinks right there in the bay. Millions of dollars gone, just sinking in the ocean. And more importantly, they're worried that the Germans have just sabotaged a massive boat right there in New York City, and the eastern seaboard is not secure. The US government, understandably, kind of freaks out, and they realize that they actually have no control over their ports because the mob has control over the ports, because the mob is deeply involved in all of the labor unions at this time, and the mob is the one that's deeply involved in all of the regular people's lives at this time, and all the dock workers are in the mafia or the mob, which is all the same thing at this point. So the US government does the logical thing in the middle of World War II, and in order to secure all of their ports and take back control from the mob and the mafia and keep the Germans out, they go to the mob and say, hey guys, do you want to take control over all of our ports? Just promise you'll keep them safe. And so the government does the logical thing, and they go to the mob and give them control over the ports, trusting that obviously these good mobster gangsters are just gonna take good care of these docks and nothing untoward will happen again. No Germans, no nothing, no problem. There's kind of a rabbit hole where like the mob probably blew that boat up in the first place. Who knows why, but what wound up happening is the mob now was given full control over the entire eastern seaboard of the United States so that they could protect us from Germany. And in case you don't run an international smuggling and crime syndicate, let's just say that having all of the ports is pretty useful when you want to smuggle things in and out of America. And so they did. World War II had not even ended when all of the Jewish mobsters started sending weapons to all of their buddies over in this new little country called Israel. Well, I guess back then it was called Palestine, but we don't need to argue about that. And so before World War II had even ended, the mob started using those ports to smuggle. And you might think smuggling drugs into the United States, but actually, one thing that they did a lot of was smuggling guns out of the United States, because the world's Jewish population was busy doing this little project over in this place called Palestine that they'd been working on for a little while. Ever since our boy Rothschild got written this letter that gave him this country, which is so crazy, they had been busy building a country over there in Palestine by moving as many Jewish people as they could into what was at the time a British colony. And by the time World War II rolled around, they had a whole bunch of their buddies all living there in Palestine, and violence was starting to escalate a little bit. And oh boy, did the US have some extra guns that the mob was liberating. I don't know if you've never received a country by mail, but let me tell you, you gotta be pretty rich to be given a country with a letter. As far as I'm aware, that's only ever happened in human history one time. And if that doesn't tell you a lot about the Rothschild family, I don't know what will. But we will revisit the Rothschild family several times in this story because they have a tendency to fund Israel's side projects. More on that later. So anyways, during World War II, the Zionists over in Palestine that are in the process of forming Israel are in negotiations with the mob in order to get weapons from the USA. And as the war winds down, the flow of weapons only increases because suddenly the USA has all these guns and bombs and munitions that they no longer know what to do with. And fortunately, the Jewish mob knows exactly what to do with them. They're sending them to Palestine. And particularly, they're sending them to 3 Zionist paramilitary groups, which formed what the Israeli movement at the time was. And so at the time, there was no Israeli government and there was no IDF. There was just a loose association of Zionists all fighting to establish their own country called Israel. And there were 3 primary paramilitary organizations: Irgun, Lehi, and Haganah. And let's be clear, all 3 of them were in the business of bombing civilians to get them to leave. But Haganah was a little more mellow about it and did not get the official name terrorist organization in the way that Lehi and Irgun did. And Lehi and Irgun were called terrorist organizations by the entire international community as well as the future government of Israel because that's what they did. They bombed civilians in hotels, in marketplaces, anywhere they could find them in order to make life as unhospitable as possible in order to convince them to leave. And during World War II, they had a moral dilemma because there's this war going on all across Europe that is displacing Jewish people specifically. And the whole point of Zionism is we want those Jewish people here. And so the Irgun and Lehi groups had a little disagreement. Who should we back in this war? Should we side with the guys that are putting the Jews into camps and killing them and kicking them out of their country? Or should we side with the Allies on the side of justice and peace and democracy? And naturally, half of the Jews in Israel decided, you know, those Nazis are kicking out a lot of Jews, and that's super helpful. I really think we should partner with them in order to get all of those Jews, the ones that they aren't killing in those camps, and get them to come on over here to Israel. Yeah, that did not age well, but half of them really thought that was the move. And I shit you not, the Lehi group was pro-fascist Italy and pro-Nazi Germany, and in active talks with the leaders of Nazi Germany and fascist Italy to hopefully bring as many Jews as possible into Israel. And they did for a little while before the war got a little crazy and Lehi realized maybe that is not the best move. But fortunately, the guys that were in charge of Lehi group that had all of those great ideas, they were good Israelis that would go on to lead the country of Israel in the future. We'll get back to them in just a minute. And so, all throughout World War II, and especially after World War II, the Jewish mob is smuggling all of these guns and weapons and bombs over to Israel in order to fight Israel's war and found the country. If you are selling guns to your buddies across the pond for years while they establish their independent state, are you all part of the same criminal organization or not? Serious question. If you've been buying guns from the mob for the last 5 years, are you a part of the mob? Or when you're done buying those guns, do you just get a free pass? Are you good? Are we cool? Just think about that. Because Israel was founded by, shall we say, militant Jewish men that had bought all of their guns from the Jewish mob in America, and now they have their very own country. This country was funded by the Rothschilds and other wealthy Jewish financiers around the world, because if you didn't realize, creating a country is pretty expensive, and they were armed by the international Jewish crime syndicates in America, because founding a country where there's already people tends to be a little violent. So, the fighting in Israel is done. The new government of Israel is looking at these paramilitary organizations that just founded their country for them, and they need to reconcile the fact that the entire world community is calling them terrorists, because they've just spent the last 5 years bombing civilians and basically using whatever means necessary in order to found Israel. So Israel turned around and realized, like, yeah, that's fair. Y'all are terrorist organizations and you've got to disband. But don't worry, I got a job for you all in my new organization called the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. And it is not a secret. You can go straight to the IDF Wikipedia page and it will tell you the IDF was formed by absorbing all 3 of those paramilitary organizations that they had just labeled as terrorist organizations. All of the leaders and generals of those terrorist organizations went on to be the future leaders of Israel. Prime ministers, presidents, members of the Likud party, which formed directly out of the Irgun. Everything that would become the politics and policy of Israel was founded in these 3 paramilitary organizations, and the people that made their names and careers killing Palestinians in those terrorist organizations, the country is only like 70 years old. So keep that in mind as we go through this story. So World War II has just ended. Israel has been formed. They have the IDF, and then they found what's called Mossad, the CIA, for Israel. And at this time, after World War II, a lot of intelligence agencies were springing up around the world, because after the detonation of the nuclear bombs over Japan and the USSR, the Cold War was not just a thing that started and ended. It was not a conflict between the US. So keep that in mind. Revolution in how wars are fought in the first place. Because once nuclear weapons were invented, no longer does the actual war take place on the battlefield. Now war takes place on the information field. And this coincided with a lot of technological advancements that made it so that it's not even very useful to fight wars on battlefields anymore, other than to get rid of all of the pores and make a lot of money for your rich friends. But the real war, the wars that overthrow countries, the wars that determine the global order, They're fought on financial markets, in information spaces, and in the halls of politics. And everyone was starting to realize that guns no longer win wars, intelligence wins wars. And so in the US, the CIA was founded. In Israel, Mossad was founded. And all around the world, different countries were strengthening their intelligence capabilities. And this became the real story of the Cold War, the war between the Western intelligence agencies and the Soviet intelligence agencies. And you could write a whole book about the history of intelligence agencies. We're not gonna. But there's one really important aspect to intelligence agencies like the CIA that we should touch on. The whole point of an intelligence agency is a phrase called plausible deniability. And it's pretty obvious. If you wanted to overthrow the government of Guatemala, you could just send the military, right? The most important part about intelligence agencies is this phrase called plausible deniability. It's the whole reason intelligence agencies exist. Because imagine that you want to overthrow the government of Italy. You don't like them. You want your buddy in charge. And you know, you could just send the military. But there's one problem with the US military, and it's called the Constitution. And you're not really allowed to just send the military to go and do things without a good reason, especially when y'all have just finished a world war and no one is stoked on sending militaries places anymore. So instead, you send the mafia. The thing about sending the mafia to do the job the military might have done, A, it's a lot cheaper than sending the military, and B, when the mafia gets caught passing bags full of money back and forth in an Italian election to sway the results, if they get caught, it wasn't you, it was just the mafia. And I'm not making this up. The CIA's very first official operation was to use their buddies in the mafia over in Italy, passing thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in the night in black duffel bags to various political candidates, different organizations, in order to sway the elections of Italy so that they wouldn't elect a communist. Because this was the start of the Cold War and communism had to be stopped at all costs. And so during the Cold War, the CIA and other intel agencies around the world realized that it was really useful to work with organized crime to do the things that you don't want to get caught doing. Because if organized crime got caught doing it, it was just criminals doing crime shit. And this became the modus operandi for all intelligence agencies all around the world. You don't need the CIA if you're only gonna do legal things. You can just send the military to do that. You can send your regular government organizations to do that. The whole point of an intelligence agency is to do things that are kind of illegal and to just not talk about them. And we all know this is true. We all know this is the point of the CIA, but no one really processes what that means. And what that means when you read the history of the CIA is the CIA working with the mob and the mafia. And there's already precedent for this because during World War II, the US government had already found out just how convenient it is to let the mob run your docks and your import and export businesses. And remember, during World War II, we had already given the mob complete control over the ports in America. So why not keep working with them since it's going so well so far? Speaking of those ports that the mob controlled, they were using them. And now that they were done smuggling their guns over to Israel to help found the whole thing, they had their sights set on a new idea. Nukes. Because after World War II and the nuclear explosions in Japan, everyone looked at that and was like, damn, those are cool, I want some. And Israel was no exception. Because if you think about yourself, if you were this young, new Jewish state, and everyone in the world wanted to destroy you, and you're surrounded by these evil Arabs that hate you now that you've moved into the neighborhood, I can think of no better way for you to get comfortable and not worry than to have a couple nukes. And so during the 50s and 60s, Israel stole nuclear material and nuclear technology from America through a company called NUMEC. It became known as the Apollo Affair. And by the time people in the American government realized that there was a whole bunch of nuclear material missing from the records of this company called NUMEC, and they went to investigate and found a whole bunch of Jewish Zionists running this company, and like, well, I don't know. Weird. It's all gone. suspicious. And the trail led pretty obviously to Israel. And that was no secret at the time, and it is definitely no secret now. And by the time John F. Kennedy came into office, Israel had already done a deal with the French to help fund this whole nuclear facility hiding out in the Negev desert. The Rothschilds had played a major role in financing that whole project, because in case you don't have a nuclear arsenal, let me tell you, it's not cheap to make one, and you need some pretty rich friends to help you do it. And so, fortunately, Israel knows some pretty rich friends that happen to all be Jewish all around the world and have a vested interest in supporting Israel and making sure that they survive. And that's fine, that's understandable. If my buddies had a country going on over there, I'd be hyped for them too. And I'd probably do what I could within my humble means to help pay for their nuclear facilities as well, because that's pretty fucking cool, let's be real. So Kennedy gets more and more, shall we say, nosy about these nuclear test facilities and is pushing for inspections and is really just getting in Israel's grill. And he's pushing not just for inspections of their nuclear facility, but to shut the nuclear programs down before Israel gets nukes. And I think we all know how that story ended, just saying. We're not gonna go down the JFK rabbit hole, but I would invite you to go down the JFK rabbit hole, because Israel was not a fan of JFK. And to this day, Israel has a secret nuclear program and a secret nuclear arsenal that the entire world knows about. And Israel has not signed the international nuclear treaties that everyone else has signed. It sounds absolutely insane, because it is, but essentially the Samson option is Israel's kind of looming threat that if we ever get into a war and we're losing, we'll throw a fucking tantrum and nuke everyone, because the Samson option is not just a declaration that we will be unafraid to use nukes against our enemies, but if our allies let us start to lose any of our wars, we're gonna nuke them too. Because y'all pieces of shit should have had our backs when we were down, and if you don't, fuck you, we're bombing everybody. I'm kind of I'm kind of embellishing, but that is actually what the Samson option talks about, and you should look it up for yourself, because it's fucking psycho. And I cannot think of anything that is more toddler than, if I don't get my way, I'm gonna fucking nuke everyone, so you better help me. So Israel's been fighting with the local Arab nations ever since they were founded, but in 1982, something really important changed. And that was that reporters finally captured on video what was really going on. And images and videos of civilians in refugee camps being killed by Israeli offensive forces started to completely change the public perception of Israel around the world. And for the first time, Israel realized that bombing civilians in a refugee camp is not a great look. And it's a pretty effective way to get rid of the people whose homes you would like to repurchase. And although it's a reasonably effective way to decrease the number of Arabs and increase the number of Jews in Israel, it's not the best way to win international support for your cause. And so in the 1980s, following the Sabra and Shatila massacres, Israel founded what was known as Hasbara, which is a word in Hebrew that means to explain. As in, let me explain to you why it's all right that we bombed that refugee camp, not a big deal. Let me explain to you that our nuclear program is none of your business, and you don't really need to ask any more questions about it. Let me explain to you why it's good for you that we use your tax dollars to lobby your politicians to give us more of your tax dollars. You know, like explaining things. Hasbara is what transformed the war for territory into the war for perception. Famously quoting from one of Hasbara's first documents, "Terror, not territory." Switch the war from focusing on Israel taking land to focusing on Israel saving us from terrorism.
And this is where the war turns from a military conflict to an ideological conflict, where the Cold War really comes into a new form. Israel hired several of the most famous propaganda artists from around the world at the time, and over time they have revised their strategies of Hasbara and published new documents to teach Israeli military officers, politicians, and civilians how to advocate for Israel the best. In fact, there is actually a TV show about it called The Ambassador. You remember back when Donald Trump was just a reality TV star and he had the TV show called The Apprentice, where Americans would compete for who could sell lemonade the best, and then whoever could sell lemonade the best would get the thumbs up from the big man and get a job or something like that. He would help them start their business or something. I forget what the show was. Anyways, think The Apprentice, but instead of selling lemonade, you're convincing people that bombing kids in refugee camps is not so bad. That is what The Ambassador is all about. And this is real. The Ambassador is a TV show that aired across Israel for many years, where Israeli civilians would compete for who could provide the best Hasbara, who could explain the Israeli situation the best. And whoever won the TV show, instead of getting funding for their next capitalistic venture, they would get a position in Israeli government, explaining to the rest of the world just how great Israel is and why all that bad stuff you see on TV is really not such a big deal, and it's mostly Iranian propaganda anyway. And the fun thing about Hasbara is they publish documents about how to do it. And in those documents, there are some pretty wild quotes. Inside of the Israel Project's 2009 Global Language Dictionary, they have a specific list talking about what are the most important things to know in order to conduct Hasbara. What are the most important talking points to have a handle on if you're going to explain Israel's situation? Number 3, the wealth, power, and success of Israel actually hurts you in the eyes of the left, while the poverty and failure of the Palestinians work to their benefit. The feeling among the liberal elite is that Israel uses all of its advancements and advantages unfairly or immorally against the Palestinians. Israel is so rich and so strong that they fail to see why it is necessary for armored tanks to shoot at unarmed kids, or why Israel needs to level homes or attack villages, or most importantly, why a Palestinian state is a threat to Israel's existence. Making the argument that Israel is a small country with tiny landmass with hostile neighbors all around you won't win either the hearts or the minds of liberal Americans. They think Israel can survive. They have a whole section on how to talk to college students about Israel, because those damn college students have some pretty anti-Semitic ideas. And then one of my favorite sections, the toughest questions, as in, what are the hardest parts of Israel's whole deal to explain, and what are the best ways to explain them without getting yourself into a little bit of a pickle on national TV? They have a section for when people ask, why did Israel use disproportionate force in Gaza? And they give you several examples of how to divert that question into a different answer, because that's awkward. They have a whole section here, remember, published in 2009, Will Israel Bomb Iran? You know, let's talk about something else, shall we? Will Israel dismantle its settlements? No comment. Here's some other talking points to distract you with. If they ask you, why are you guys electing racist people to the government of Israel, in this case Lieberman as their example, how do you divert attention away from the racist people in the Israeli government? They give you several examples about how you can divert attention to the not racist people in the Israeli government, because it's kind of awkward to talk about the racist ones. And then they have a whole excerpt from the old Hamas charter that is very important to read to everybody, and a bunch of facts and figures that are very pro-Israel for you to keep in mind, so that you can help and explain the plight of Israel. And I don't mean to say that there is no plight in Israel. I don't mean to say that Israelis have, perfect lives. I don't mean to say that Hamas and other folks haven't attacked Israel. I just mean to say that if you're gonna defend Israel, why go with the truth when you could go with Hasbara? Because the fact of the matter is, the truth looks pretty fucking awkward when you say it out loud on live TV, and so we've devised an entire strategy of what works better. And I know it's all fun and jokes to talk about Hasbara and to laugh at their propaganda manual, but you need to consider what this means for the whole world and what this means for Israeli people. When you grow up in a society where Hasbara, propaganda, is celebrated on a national level, where you have competitions on TV for who can be the best propaganda artist, when your whole existence is raised into this Israel first at all costs, and you are willing to stretch the facts and propagandize your own people and the rest of the world in order to support your Israeli cause, that trains your young people to think in a very specific way. And when you celebrate Hasbara over the truth, your young people learn to think in terms of Hasbara, not the truth. And so you wind up with a world full of Israelis whose entire lives have been shaped by Hasbara, not by the truth. And to be clear, the truth is not always in favor of the Palestinians. The truth is just the truth. But when you're trying to explain what's happening in Israel and Palestine on live TV, going with the truth is not the best option for Israel. And they realized that a long time ago, and they've been doing Hasbara ever since. And it is not just a booklet that I'm reading from. It is an entire global campaign. Because when you look at the way the news covers the issue, you see a very important skew towards Israel in all of American media. It's not that way in Europe. And if you've traveled in Europe, if you've spoken to Europeans about it, if you've watched European news coverage, ever since back in the 60s, all the way up until today, the coverage of the Israel-Palestine conflict abroad is very different than it is in the United States, because you can't control the news everywhere. But you can control most of the news in the United States, and they damned well do. And we don't need to get into who owns all the news companies just yet, but study after study has shown that the news coverage in the United States is slanted significantly more in Israel's favor than the news coverage in other countries around the world. One of the best ways to figure out who controls the news is to look at what the news is unwilling to talk about. And there might be no better example of what the news is unwilling to talk about than Jeffrey Epstein. And yeah, the news is totally willing to talk about the fact that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide and Jeffrey Epstein got caught doing this thing, but the news paints a very careful picture of Jeffrey Epstein. And one thing they are very careful not to talk about is the extensive connections between Jeffrey Epstein and Israel. Jeffrey was Mossad. He worked for the government of Israel. He also worked with other governments, namely the CIA and Saudi intelligence, but he was Mossad. He was a Jewish man who was elevated to his position by all Jewish men all throughout his career. He was smuggling arms for Israel back in the 80s and trafficking kids for Israel all through the 90s and getting blackmail on British and American politicians and celebrities around the world on behalf of Israel. He was meeting with Ehud Barak over and over and over again, not just because Ehud Barak has some weird fucking tendencies, but also because Ehud Barak was his boss ever since he started working for Israel back in the 80s, smuggling arms with Adnan Khashoggi and Robert Maxwell. We know that Jeffrey Epstein was Mossad, but you will not hear the news talk about Jeffrey Epstein's association with Mossad, because that starts to bring up some pretty fucking awkward questions. And it's time to talk about those questions, because now that you have a more clear picture of how Israel was founded, how Jewish organized crime was integral to that storyline and had no reason to stop being a part of that storyline, when you look around the world today, what do you see? And does today look like a world ruled by benevolent, kind, happy leaders, or does it look like a world that's ruled by criminals? And you would think that America is the biggest country in the world. It's the richest country in the world. It's the biggest military in the world. The American empire rules the world. All of these crazy conspiracy theorists that say that Israel actually controls America, that is ridiculous, because Israel is just a tiny country in the Middle East just fighting to defend their borders and protect themselves. And you're right, Israel is a tiny country. And no, Israel does not control the world, but organized crime is not bound by borders. And organized crime is not just a country. Organized crime is international, and the US government has been working with organized crime ever since the 40s and before. And the more you look at the history of a group like the CIA, the more you realize that the CIA used to work for the president. But ever since John F. Kennedy was killed, the president has kind of worked for the CIA. I'm no expert on internal Israeli politics, but I can only imagine the types of politics that are going on behind closed doors in a nation founded so recently on so much violence like Israel. So let's talk about Epstein. Obviously, you could make a whole lifetime supply of crime documentaries about Jeffrey Epstein, and you could write a whole lifetime supply of books about Jeffrey Epstein. And lots of great people have, and you should read them and you should watch them. But let's just follow a specific trail through Jeffrey Epstein's network into the upper echelons of the US government and think really carefully about what this means about the world that you live in today. One of Jeffrey Epstein's favorite buddies was Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton flew on Epstein's plane more than almost anyone else. He visited Epstein's island more than almost anyone else. And he even invited Epstein directly into the White House on many occasions. We know quite clearly that Bill Clinton was into some pretty dark shit. Obviously, we don't know what, because obviously, how could they possibly find out? Because obviously, they didn't find anything in that raid that they did, and they don't even have the client list anyways. And how would you ever solve such a complicated crime with no evidence and a dude that just mysteriously committed suicide with no cameras? And I mean, their hands are really tied. But imagine we had evidence, and imagine what it would be. Imagine, why was Bill spending so much time with Jeffrey Epstein all through the 90s and into the 2000s until they got caught? Bill Clinton was the president of the United States of America, and he was flying around the world with a spy for a foreign country known to be blackmailing powerful people with kid stuff so that he could leverage them. And Bill Clinton was leveraged on behalf of Israel multiple times. And then, right when Israel was going through one of its most important diplomatic transitions, and Bill Clinton was orchestrating the Oslo Accords, touchy time about the borders in Israel, about the political structures with Israel and Palestine, there's this scandal that breaks where this Jewish woman just happens to be sucking Bill off. Weird. That gets leaked to the press. I wonder who leaked that information. It's a good thing it wasn't a kid, eh, Bill? If that had been news about a kid, would have been a different story. Maybe you should think about that next time that we ask you to do something. Because I bet there's videos of other things that Bill has done floating around out there. Know what I mean, Hillary? So it's important to think about what we know about Bill. Doesn't matter if they'll admit it. Doesn't matter if the news will talk about it. We all know what that means about Bill. Hillary also knows what that means about Bill. I can't help but notice that she didn't go anywhere, at least when the other Bill Gates, got caught being Epstein's other best friend. At least Melinda had the spine to fucking leave his ass. She didn't want anything to do with that. She thought it was disgusting, because we all know what it means, and she got the fuck out of there. Who knows, maybe it was for taxes, I don't know. I'm giving her the benefit of the doubt. Hillary did no such thing. Hillary stood by her boy Bill, because let's be honest, Hillary's been up to some pretty weird shit too. And the more you start to look into Hillary, the more you start to find weird things about Haiti and other weird countries. I'm not gonna say anymore. I love life and I'm very happy. Thank you, Hillary. But not only did Hillary not leave her boy Bill, she ran for president. And then all of their buddies, deeply entrenched in politics, supported her run for president and championed her as the next president of the United States of America. And if you don't think that all of them know what was going on Epstein's Island and what Bill was up to, I got a vaccine to sell you, because
It's a big club, and you're not in it. And they are running cover for each other, and they all know. And the reason why we have not prosecuted the Epstein client list is because they are the Epstein client list. And even the ones that aren't engaged in those things know what those things are, and they're not about to rat on their buddies because they're all getting rich together. And everything is going just fine for them. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. So anyways, we could talk about the Clintons forever, but let's rewind and finish our story, because Bill Clinton capped off a very eventful time in the history of Israel and the history of the world. And that time was before 9/11. And ever since 9/11, you have lived in a very different world. Before 9/11, we lived in the Cold War. But we no longer had the USSR to fight against. But we no longer had a Soviet Union to make you scared of. We no longer had this boogeyman all around the world to fight proxy wars over. We no longer had an excuse for nuclear and military proliferation. And it was about time for a new one. Cue the war on terror. There might be no day in history with more conspiracy theories than September 11, 2001. And if you have not done your own research into those conspiracy theories, I highly recommend it. JFK and 9/11 are two of the most interesting events to do your own research about, because they are two of the events in human history with the most overt lies and cover-ups ever conceived. And the number of lies to unpack around 9/11 is staggering, but the most relevant have to do with the Israeli art students and the dancing Israelis. And once again, the media will be very quick to say that those are just conspiracy theories and there's nothing to them, they've been debunked 100 times, and that's fine, maybe. All I'm saying is that you can read the FBI documents yourself about the Israelis that were clapping and cheering and high-fiving during 9/11 terror attacks for yourself, and you can read the reporting and draw your own conclusions.
That they were like happy, you know, they didn't look shocked to me. You know, they didn't look shocked. I thought it was very strange.
Because sure, the FBI determined that it's not suspicious that these Israelis were dancing and cheering and taking photos of the burning trade centers and talking about how great it was that now America will understand our plight and now America will hate terrorists just as much as us. Israel's had a problem for a long time with all of the Arab nations all around them. In particular, the strongest Arab nations, Iraq, Iran, Syria. And we know that Israel has had a problem with these specific nations for a long time because they've been writing about their problem with these nations for years. And Israel focus groups, like the Project for a New American Century, have been writing about how it would be really great to go to war with countries like Iraq and Syria and Iran for a long time. It is no secret that Israel has wanted war in these countries and has wanted these countries destabilized and overthrown for numerous reasons: oil, pipelines, terrorism, supremacy, whatever it is. But possibly the most important outcome of 9/11 is ideological, not territorial. After 9/11, every American was trained to see Arab people as terrorists. And the media was so effective at establishing this narrative within your mind that most Americans don't even realize how conditioned you have been to think of all Arab people as potential terrorists, and everyone else is far less likely to commit acts of terrorism. Need I remind you that until very recently, when a little Wikipedia article was changed, the world generally agreed that the first modern terrorist attack in history was the Jewish terrorist attack on the King David Hotel during the combat for the establishment of Israel. Some of the very first terrorist groups in the modern world were Jewish terrorist groups terrorizing the Arab populations in Palestine for the formation of Israel. Terrorism does not have a color or a nationality or a religion. Terrorism is when you kill civilians. Simple as that. Doesn't matter if you're a nation, doesn't matter if you're a militant group, doesn't matter if you're an individual. If you're running around killing civilians, that's terrorism. Doesn't matter if it's self-defense, doesn't matter if they look different than you, doesn't matter if they called you names. Even during wartime, there is a limit to how many civilian casualties are acceptable and how many constitute war crimes and terrorism. And certainly, there are a lot of Arab people around the world
that do terrorist stuff. But there's also a lot of people of every other color that do terrorist stuff. But by painting Arabs as the face of terrorism, Israel won a critical propaganda victory because the American mind is now trained to see Israel's enemies as their enemies. And we have been fighting their wars for them ever since. And we have successfully overthrown all of the enemies of Israel in the region, except for one. Syria has been plunged into civil war for years now. Iraq, don't need to tell you what happened there. Egypt got taken care of way back in the day during the Suez Crisis. And the only one left is Iran. And who's talking about Iran an awful lot these days?
The objective of Israel's military operation is to remove this threat.
So you do the math on what comes next in that storyline. And that pretty much catches us up to today. What is the world like today, and why is it like that? So now we've looked at how the Jewish mob was instrumental in the founding of Israel. We've looked at how the Jewish mob was partnered from a very early day with the American government and the Israeli government in pursuit of, shall we say, somewhat unpopular ends. And we've looked at how the Jewish mob worked with both the US government and the Israeli government to accomplish somewhat clandestine objectives. And over the last 40 or 50 years, we've been told that organized crime just kind of faded away. It's not what it used to be. All the old mobsters, they died out, they were arrested, it's over, case closed. But when I look at that whole story, what I see is the Jewish mob helping to found a country that went on to do mob shit all the way until today. And when you look at the state of the world today, ask yourself, does it feel like you're being ruled by nice, benevolent rulers? Or does it feel like you're being ruled by criminals? And if we are being ruled by criminals, what kind of evidence would we see to justify that? What kind of evidence would we see to support that theory? If you were running a global organized crime syndicate, what would your objectives be, and what things would you need to control in order to maintain your power? You'd probably want a certain amount of control over the banks and the monetary system. You'd want to have global military supremacy and control over global warfare, right? And you would definitely want control over global culture, media, and celebrity, because you wouldn't want anyone to look too closely at what you were up to and start having too many ideas about, I don't know, maybe not being ruled by criminals. And so when we look around, what do we see? Well, we see an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that Jews control all the banks, which is obviously not true. They don't control all the banks, they control a lot of them. And an awful lot of the directors of the Federal Reserve have been Jewish, like way more than 2% of them. And Paul Warburg, who was instrumental in the founding of the Fed, did represent the Rothschild and Jewish banking interests in Europe. I'll let you make your own decision about the banking system, because once you move on to the global military system, oh, case closed. America rules the global military world. America is the dominant military force, not Israel. And so obviously there is no organized Jewish mob that's ruling the world because America is in charge of the global military. Well, not so fast. Who's in charge of America, right? There's three branches of government: the judicial, legislative, and executive. The judicial is the courts, the judges. It's very complicated. They're appointed by the other two branches, right? But who controls the legislative branch? The Congress. I think we all know by now who controls Congress. It's whoever pays Congress. And unless you've been living under a rock throughout 2024, I think you know by now that Israel buys all of Congress. They famously brag openly on the internet about how they win 98% of their campaigns in America. When you look at the US Senate, there are 100 US senators, 2 per state. And 93 out of 100 current senators today in 2024 have taken Israeli AIPAC money in their campaigns to get themselves elected. Israel owns Congress. They brag about it. We all know about it. And if you're gonna defend it, that's cool. That is your right. But it's important that you defend the facts about it, not some fantasy about it, as though Israel and Israeli money was not paying for everyone in Congress to be pro-Israel. That is why when Bibi Netanyahu comes to America and gives a mediocre speech about the next war that they're gonna sell us, he gets over 50 standing ovations in a single hour and a half. That's not because he's such a great orator, it's not because he's such a great guy, it's because he's got a lot of money and all of them want it and they are willing to do anything to get it. That's how they got their job in the first place. And lastly, who controls culture and media and celebrity? Well, ask our boy Jeffrey. A lot of people know about Jeffrey's blackmail operations in big tech and in government with Prince Andrew, but not a lot of people know just how deep his connections ran through Hollywood. And that's because the moment that the Jeffrey Epstein story started to break, they started to burn some bridges and push some people out of the limelight as quickly as possible. And there might be no better example of this than Peggy Segal. That's right, Peggy, we didn't forget about you. Peggy is famous for being one of the most connected women in Hollywood over the last 60 years. Peggy's the kind of woman that brags about her list of 30,000 high-profile friends in every industry that she uses to get your movie to the Oscars, your movie into the Academy Awards, because the way that Hollywood works is a game of influence, and you need people to connect powerful people to support your movie, to go to your premiere. It's all a game of influence peddling, and Peggy Segal is one of the greatest masters of this art form that Hollywood has ever known. And up until the Jeffrey Epstein story broke, she was one of the most popular people in all of Hollywood because there was no place more powerful than a Peggy Segal party. And Jeffrey knew this. He was great friends with Peggy. Such great friends, in fact, that when he got out of jail back in 2009, Peggy organized a little get-together for him. He specifically requested that Peggy organize his get-together, his get out of jail free party. Famously, Prince Andrew attended, later got himself into a bit of a pickle on live TV trying to explain what that was all about. This is also where George Stephanopoulos and several other media personalities were at that party. Peggy Segal is indicative of Jeffrey Epstein's deep connections into Hollywood. His deep access not just to politicians, not just to wealthy financiers, but to all manner of celebrities and stars. But there is one group of celebrities that Epstein couldn't really vibe with, and that is rappers. And that's black people. I'm just speculating, but I can't imagine that Epstein would have blended in very well at a P. Diddy party. But fortunately, he didn't have to, because P. Diddy had his mansions all wired up with cameras and was handling that whole scene all on his own. And it's just an awfully weird coincidence that all of politics and celebrity and Hollywood is all sexually blackmailed with these secret video files that Jeffrey Epstein's been collecting. And then you turn around and look at the music industry and everyone that he might not be able to blackmail, and there's someone else doing sexual video blackmail on all of them for the last 20 years. And I know what you're saying. P. Diddy isn't Israeli, P. Diddy's not Jewish, P. Diddy has nothing to do with it. Who wired those houses up for him? Who gave him a record label? Who funded all the parties that P. Diddy was throwing? And I'm just saying, do your own research, draw your own conclusions. Nothing is certain in this crazy world. It's just kind of a weird coincidence. Running a sexual blackmail ring is not a simple task, and I just can't help but wonder who taught Diddy how to do it. And so now we come to 2024, a world where up is down and left is right and 2 + 2 = 5. Shut up, you anti-Semitic racist. We all know that the world is completely fucked right now, but what most of us don't realize is that the world is not inherently fucked. The world is being ruled by criminals. The world feels like it's ruled by criminals because it is. And those criminals have a very clear history dating straight back to the streets of New York, to Prohibition and beyond. And it's all there for you to know if you just look and do the research and draw the connections for yourself. Sure, the story is complicated and this explanation has been simplified. But when you actually look at the world you live in today and you think about who has power and what do they do with that power, why do these people make these decisions? Why is this the way it is? Why has no one prosecuted a single Epstein client? There Occam's razor. Usually, the simplest explanation is the best. And when the whole world looks like it's being run by a criminal cabal, maybe the world is being run by a criminal cabal. And just because the news won't talk about Epstein doesn't mean that Epstein wasn't important. And just because Epstein accidentally died in prison doesn't mean that his job is still vacant. Those networks are very active in the world today. And until we see mass arrests of all of the clients of those networks, and we see children rescued from those networks, and we see a major restructuring of the systems that supported those networks and allowed for them to operate in the highest offices of government, of celebrity, of media, they're not going anywhere. They are still very much active today. And yes, what that means is that right now, while you are watching this, wherever you are on whatever day it is today, right now, somewhere in this world, some billionaire, some millionaire is abusing a kid right this moment using these networks because they never closed. They just changed hands. Epstein expired. Someone else took his job, and I guarantee you they're still doing just fine, because until we see all of these motherfuckers brought to justice, everything's gonna stay exactly the same. And ignoring it will not solve the problem. So it's time we address it and confront it. And if it walks like organized crime and it talks like organized crime, it is probably the Jewish mob that founded their own fucking country and moved in and has been doing mobster shit ever since. Israel absolutely has a right to exist as long as they stop doing mobster shit to the rest of the world. And sure, Israel can do what it wants within its borders. But since when was it okay for Israel to buy out your politicians to do what it wants within your borders? And yeah, maybe it's not the best idea that Iran get nuclear weapons, but maybe you should think carefully about the country that is most vocal about that concern, because they stole their nuclear weapons from us, and they currently use them to nuclear blackmail the world if they don't get their way. And you don't know most of this because of a global Hasbara campaign. The literal inventors of propaganda have told you how to think, how to see, and it's been repeated so many times that the lie has become the truth. And it is time that we all had an honest conversation about what is actually going on in Israel, because the number one cause of anti-Semitism in the world today is not anti-Semitism. It is Israel doing dumb shit that is not good for the global image of Jewish people. No one is more harmed by Israel's actions than Jewish people around the world that are just trying to live their lives with their neighbors in peace. And it does not help when the Jewish state is doing mob shit and killing civilians by the thousands, ruling America through proxy and bribery and blackmail, and generally pissing everyone off in the international community. That is not a good look, and it is time for everyone to address it with nuance and care. And the answer is not to blame all Jewish people, because that just leads to the ongoing cycle of violence and victimization that got us to the state of Israel in the first place. The answer is to call out mob shit where we see it and demand resolutions and a better world. To speak openly and freely regardless of what names the ADL calls you, because the ADL is a part of that mob shit. And if you're gonna be scared of getting called a name, you're never gonna do shit to an international crime ring that controls the media, the money, and the means. 2024 has been a crazy year so far, and so much has come to light and come to the forefront of our collective consciousness that was hidden deep beneath a mountain of propaganda for so long. But the job is not done. And until civilians are done being bombed, until children in Gaza and Palestine can live in peace, until the US government cleans house, until the Jeffrey Epstein client list is prosecuted and brought to justice, until then,
The job is not done, and the world is still ruled by the same pedophile pieces of shit that have been ruling it your entire life. And ignoring that fact is not gonna help anyone. So it's time we talk about it, it's time you learn about it, and it's time that we change our expectations from letting the world be the same way it's always been and letting the same pieces of shit that have always ruled it continue to rule it, and we demand more. Because in the famous words of the great George W. Bush, fool me once, shame on you. But a fooled man can't get fooled again.
We would know virtually nothing about what's going on at our southern border were it not for independent journalists and grassroots filmmakers.
Ryan Mata, he's the investigative journalist behind ThisIsTreason.com.
Ryan Mata and his team, his editing team, created what I believe is a unicorn, never to be seen, has never been seen and will never be seen again.
But he released it and it's called What is Treason? Trafficked.
It is the most powerful piece of filmmaking I have ever seen.
By the way, was really well done.
If everybody were to watch a documentary, What is Treason? #trafficked, if everybody watched that, all 300+ million Americans, Trump would win like this. I don't know why it's not the #1 issue. Every time I come back from an operation, I'm just like incensed when I read the news, like what made the headlines. The headlines every day should be, millions of kids are enslaved and the United States is driving the market with their policies.
My work revolves around rescuing trafficked children. The only way to combat this evil is sunlight. We must expose the system that allows these monsters to stay hidden in the shadows. America is the #1 consumer of child porn, and we have more agents working in the PR department at every FBI field office than we do hunting down these predators who are selling child porn on the internet. I wonder why America is the #1 consumer of child porn.
It is as sinister as it gets. People buying or selling children for
An awful situation now.
To really drive this fact home, last year Alex Rosen, one man, was able to expose 248 pedophiles. The entire FBI only arrested 1,408, meaning one man with the right resources could take down more pedophiles than the entire FBI. This is why I need your support. I've dedicated the last 3 years of my life to exposing this evil. Over the past 8 months, I've released 6 full-length Netflix-quality documentaries showing how the United States government is running the world's largest government-sponsored, taxpayer-funded child trafficking syndicate. I cashed out $100,000 of my 401k to undertake this mission, turning me into the most censored filmmaker in America. I am permanently banned on LinkedIn, demonetized on 3 YouTube channels, had 3 Instagram accounts deleted, lost 2 Twitter accounts, and I'm on my 12th TikTok account. The censorship industrial complex has cut off every source of funding that I could use to generate income. I placed my first film behind a paywall. We made over $125,000 in sales, but the film didn't reach the masses. I need to give these films away for free to wake up the masses and save these children. It was God who sent me on this mission. Now I'm asking you for help to continue God's mission. Please visit GiveSendGo.com/Ryan Meta Films and support this cause. For $100,000, we can continue to operate for an entire year producing 4 more documentaries. For $1 million, my voice would become so loud that I could force this administration to undertake radical reform and bring home over 50% of the kidnapped children in America.
We know that there was upwards to over 300,000 children that were lost.
During the Biden administration, HHS became a collaborator in child trafficking and for